Hello, friends. Welcome to the Reasonable Truth podcast. And this is your host, Prashant Daniel. Thank you for joining us. And I have a very, very good friend joining us today, Dr. Emily Stevens. Emily is originally from Michigan. She did her undergrad in psychology from Liberty University, got an MA philosophy from Talbot, and then she did her PhD at my alma mater, University of Aberdeen in the UK. And she has done her dissertation on bioethics and the philosophy of technology. And her research interests include aesthetics, beauty, philosophy of technology, transhumanism, AI, and scholasticism. All boring stuff. You know how it is. These things are just so... No, I'm just kidding. All very, very fascinating stuff. Emily, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. This has been a long time coming. I've been actually wanting to have you on our podcast for a few years. And I don't know, it seems like you've been busy. Yeah. It seems like you've been busy or something. I don't know what you've been up to, but, judging from all these, educational pursuits, that would explain why.
Moving a lot, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes. Well, very good. I'm really glad to have you on here. And I still remember, Emily, when, we go back quite a ways. We go back about 12 years-ish, I think. Has it been 12 years? 2012. No, it's actually 15.
Has it been 15?
Yeah, because it was 2012 is when I met you.
Okay.
And we are at 2025. Yes. So it's been about 13 years. Sorry.
13. I was going to say it's been over 10, but
yes.
The extra years, they're all a blur.
Yeah, been about 13 years. And I remember you and I would have some good conversations about different things. And I remember when you told me that you were going to go to the University of Aberdeen, and I was like, great, fantastic. And we've had since then had the chance to talk about your experiences there and all that. So that is great. All right. So let's get started into this. This is your area of expertise. You've obviously done a lot of reading, a lot of research in this area. This has been an area of research and interest for me, even over the last maybe 2 years or so. And it is a very, very fascinating field. And I'd love to talk to you about it today. So before we kind of get into the weeds, why don't you tell our audience how you got interested in this field of philosophy of technology?
Well, I heard a podcast on transhumanism when I was much younger, like 18 years ago or something. So it's been a while. Goodness, it's been a while. Yeah. So I heard a podcast on transhumanism. I thought it was the craziest and wildest thing I'd ever heard of, and was like, I need to go research this, and what are Christians saying about it, and who's interacting with this philosophy. And then it sort of became a sort of back burner area of interest. Like I didn't do a whole lot of research in it. I ended up interested in bioethics because of transhumanism. And and then I found myself at Talbot because, so long story short, I was in the apologetics program, and one of the Talbot philosophy professors pulled me aside and said, "Hey, what are you planning on doing with the degree you're getting?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure, but I'm really interested in bioethics." And he said, "You're in the wrong program. You should be in the philosophy department program." And I said, "Okay, do you think I can do it? Because I know it's a hard program." And he was like, "Yeah, you'll be fine." So, so I ended up in that program, and then talking to the professors there, I realized philosophy of technology is a very small field. Nobody at Talbot really had a lot to say about the discipline. I asked, who's doing research in this area, right? And because it's an analytic program, they weren't as interested in it. So analytic philosophers tend to do more philosophy of engineering than philosophy of technology, which is the distinction, right? So, I ended up doing some of my own research with an art professor there. He did some independent studies for me, and then I ended up at Aberdeen because I found a researcher over there that was interested in my dissertation topic. So that's how, that's my long 18-year journey. And
no, that's good. I believe that 18 years ago, there's probably nobody really, it wasn't even on the radar of most, even academics, I think. It was just kind of an up and coming field, and there were definitely not I'm actually surprised you ran into a podcast on it like 18 years ago.
Yeah, it was a discernment ministries podcast, and the guy was connecting
No kidding.
transhumanism. Yeah, transhumanism and
Wow.
Mormonism, and I was like, wait, what is going on? So yeah, I God intended for me to hear that podcast and research the stuff that I have. So yeah.
That's very fascinating. I kind of remember when it kind of hit home for me was a few years ago. I mean, obviously, I've heard of artificial intelligence and all that stuff, but really, when it really kind of caught my attention was it was actually sort of an anecdotal thing. I was headed out the door one day, and my Amazon Alexa device suddenly popped up, and she was like, based on your history, your usage history, you are due to get your laundry detergent of this. And I'm like, I'd never heard her do that before. And so I was like, oh, I mean, surely she can't be right about that. And, I was about to walk out the door, and I was like, you know what? Let me just go check. She says I'm low and I'm due. Surely I'm sure there's plenty of detergent. So I walk all the way to my laundry room, and it's low. It's low. And I'm like, wow, okay, she was right. Okay, total coincidence, no big deal. And I get in my car, and then my, Apple Maps pops up, and it gives me the directions to school to go pick up the boys, which is where I was headed. And I'm thinking, okay, this is also kind of bizarre. And then the more I thought about it, I realized, wow, there's the AI in my phone now knows my patterns. It knows my schedule. And it's like, okay, every day at this time, Prashant goes to this place, and this is probably where you're headed. So I'm going to preemptively give you directions, give you traffic, give you weather, give you all these things. And I remember sitting in my car and thinking, wow, this is crazy. Welcome to, artificial intelligence. And so that was sort of my moment where I was like, wow, this is nuts. This is something that is going to transform everything.
Yeah, and change, like, oh, you didn't want this before, but based on your pattern in history, you don't want that brand detergent. This is actually gets better reviews, and so you want this detergent instead. That kind of a thing.
Right. And we'll get into the sort of the aspects of, okay, how intrusive is that? Is it good? Is
Mhm.
it bad? And we'll get into all of that, definitely, for sure. But I kind of wanted to talk about, let's give me kind of an overview of technology, because we're not Amish, we're not like completely anti-technology. We're not avoiding all technology. We're using technology right now, obviously, but help our listeners sort of understand a worldview, a telos for technology, if you will. And where did this begin? Is this something important? Obviously, it's important, but give us kind of a 30,000-foot view summary of the importance of technology in our life.
Yeah, so it's funny you mention the Amish because they're actually not anti-technology. If you look at it, how what they do, they pick and choose based on how they imagine the technology disrupting their society, right? So you can find Amish people wearing rollerblades. It's really funny to see an Amish girl in a skirt wearing rollerblades, right? But they're allowed to use those because it's not going to destroy the society that they have and the community that they have, right? So,
And
um,
by that, you mean that they think it doesn't affect the morality of their lives or anything like that.
well, or just the communal aspects that are interwoven through everything, right? So
Got it.
if you bring in the internet, for example, to the Amish, it would get everyone addicted to the internet. It would probably make porn a problem for them. Um, it would make it more difficult for them to communicate to each other and to have the strong community bonds that they do have, right? So there's certain things that the technology does when you embrace it to your community that you don't see for a while. So they're very cautious in adopting something new just because they know what their community is, what their social life is, and they want to keep it that way. Because like they also use like power tools too, right? Like you can see Amish people
Right.
putting barns up with power tools. So it's not that they don't use the technology; it's just they're very careful what they adopt and what they don't. So
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, that's a fair point. I have to retract that statement, and apologies to all the Amish out there. Please don't
that
start
are
some long
listening.
Reddit thread, bashing me or cancel me or anything like that. But no, I think that's really good. It almost seems like they actually have the right balanced view on what technology can be and should be, and they use it appropriately without, in most cases, hopefully without crossing any boundaries that affect their, like you said, their communal orientation or moral orientation and things like that. So that's good. Um, Technology is a very, very broad term. Obviously, I remember Dr. Alan Gomes in his class. We talked a little bit about this. The class itself was about the patristic fathers, if I remember correctly. But somehow technology came into the discussion, and I know how it came into the discussion. It was about he was talking about atrophy, the atrophy of human body, and everything like that, and that's kind of what brought it up. But human beings have engaged and created and invented technology to help make life better and to improve their lives, to make things easier, if you will. And I think that there's certainly nothing wrong with that. As Christians, we can understand that we live in a fallen world, and so technology certainly helps make the world a a better place, or a place that we're able to cope with better. And somewhere along the ways, a line was crossed, right? Is there any way to legitimately say where that line is in history? I don't know. I don't know if there is, but you've obviously done more work in this field. Where do you think the sort of the innocence of technology crossed over into uh, you know, a slippery slope to where we are today? Is that even a reasonable question to ask?
Yeah, so I tend to have a minority view where I think there's a distinction between tools and technology. So I think a tool, and I haven't worked this out so like very well. I just have sort of an instinct on it, right? Like
It's all good. Yeah.
yeah, that like certain things like a hammer would be a tool, um, but a nail gun would be technology, right? So there's something about the distinction there. Like I said, it's a minority view. Most people don't think that. They think just everything is technology, from a wheel to a hammer to a cell phone to the computer you're using and stuff like that. Um, but I would say so. I would agree with a philosopher named Don Idy, who would say when science and technology merged together is when technology changed. So he would say, like, when was the scientific revolution? Like the 1500s? I'm really bad with numbers and dates and stuff, so I
Somewhere
never
around
can,
there. Yeah.
yeah, I never can keep all the dates, perfectly in my mind. But it was like roughly around the 1500s when science and technology merged together, because you have like Galileo with his mic or telescope changing how we understand astronomy and that kind of stuff, right? So Idy would say at some point technology and science merged together, and prior to then they would have been two separate disciplines, but now they're kind of intertwined in a way that you can't pull the two of them apart. And I think that's when um, things started to go awry. So we have like a 500-year-old problem by now, in my view. And like I said, not everybody's going to
Sure.
agree with that. So what you were saying about like the desire to cope with a broken world, I think would be pre the scientific revolution. And then
Okay.
after the scientific revolution is more the desire to control things and to eliminate chance, which the philosopher who says something similar to that would be George Grant. But so you sort of need to eliminate chance from your world, and when things just sort of happen, right? So you want to control everything, and keep things that you don't want happening from happening, basically. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the
Right.
question or not.
No, no, it perfectly answers the question. In
Yeah.
fact, I actually like that distinction, and I think it's good to wrestle with. I like that you said, that you haven't kind of worked out all the nuances and the distinctions, and maybe there is something more to work out, and even if there isn't, I think it's a good, healthy tension to for us to think about. And while you were talking about that, it reminded me of the Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
he talks about the kind of the concepts of mimesis and poesis, right? And mimesis is this worldview where everything is bigger than you. You're just a cog in the wheel, if you will, of the whole mechanism. and human beings have to figure out what their telos is, what is their design, what is their purpose in the grand scheme of things. And that is how the world was for a long time. Enter the scientific revolution, and now we suddenly see the world moving from a mimetic world to a sort of poetic world. And I'm using the language of Charles Taylor here. And for our listeners online, poesis is a worldview where um, the things that are around you are raw material or data that you can use to create or manipulate or change the world around you, or change circumstances in your favor and things like that. And so that's where also there's something shifted, something changed there, where we were at first at the mercy of this world, at the mercy of the universe, at the mercy of the elements, if you will. And then it reached a point where man was now able to use science and technology and everything he has to now shape the world and not be at the mercy of the world. Who is it? Carl Truman, I think, does a good job talking about this in his book. What is it? The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, I think. In that book, he talks about how the agrarian world, the farmers, for example, were at the mercy of the climate. They were at the mercy of the weather systems and things like that. And now that's not the case. Now we understand soil chemistry. We have irrigation technology, and now we even have technology where you can sort of trigger rainfall through cloud seeding and things like that. So while you were talking about that, it reminded me of this whole distinction between mimesis and poesis. And would you think that the scientific revolution is probably somewhere around there, where we shifted from that worldview onto the poesis worldview, like Charles Taylor said?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so now that we are in this place, I think it seems almost inevitable that human beings would not stop there, right? It's almost never that way. You crack the door open for something comes in with good intentions, and then it morphs into something else. And so now, fast forward 2025, here we are with artificial intelligence and dictating, when we should buy our laundry detergent, and what route I should take and things like that. And now I want to pull back a little bit here, and I don't want to make it sound like all technology is bad. I don't want to make it sound like we should avoid all technology like the plague. And maybe I should stop using the word technology. Maybe I should say AI. There is good AI, if that's a helpful term. There is strong AI, weak AI. Talk to our listeners a little bit about that. Do you make such distinctions between strong and weak AI, or how do you do that? How do you parse that out in your work?
Yeah, so I'm kind of new to the discipline of AI, right? Like it's something that I've picked up with a friend of mine, who's also a philosopher, and we've been working on a side project together, trying to get something off the ground. From my perspective, the strong versus weak AI doesn't really, I don't really care either way. I mean, it's more terrifying if we make a strong AI, right, that actually is thinking. But personally, I don't think that's possible. I think what will end up happening is we have, so because I'm assuming by strong and weak AI you mean one is self-conscious and the other's not, right? So strong AI is self-conscious, weak AI is not.
Yeah. Well,
But I could be wrong about that. So how are
no,
you?
I think you're generally right. I think that the actual people in the field would hesitate to use the word conscious as much as, for example, examples of weak AI would be like Amazon Alexa, or Siri, smart home assistants, your Roomba that vacuums your house using the LiDAR scanner. All those kind of things would be considered like weak AI. And strong AI, I still think we're not quite there yet, but we're fast approaching that horizon where it is able to make calculated decisions, learn patterns. This is where machine learning comes into effect, and it is able to make what we would call rational decisions based on context or contextual circumstances and data that is given to it. So that's how I sort of make the distinction between strong and weak AI. But I think you're right. I think strong AI is definitely where the imagination goes to in terms of what could possibly go wrong if these things, start making decisions on its own.
Yeah, and the sort of robots that we see where they're trying to make robots that you can bring into your house and stick AI in it, and then it's kind of like a companion. So I would say, I mean, if that's how you're defining weak AI, I still wouldn't use it. So my personal position is don't use it at all. Like as much as you
Sure.
can possibly go through the world without using it, I wouldn't use it. So like a smart home, I have zero desire to have my refrigerator ordering my half and half or whatever for me. Um, I'm an adult. I can do that myself. Like
Right.
that's how I'm thinking of it. Is I make my own rational decisions. I don't need a computer to be making my decisions for me.
Right.
Right. So yeah. So like if I want, like your example of the car giving you directions, right? If I want to know like how to get somewhere, I can pull up Google Maps and plug
Right.
in the address myself. I don't need the little algorithm running in my phone to do it for me. And
Right.
if you start relying on, and this would go for strong AI too, as you're distinguishing it, like the more you rely on it, the more you will need to rely on it. And so you will over
Right.
time lose the ability to make decisions for yourself, lose the ability to figure out, like to see what is your desire versus what's the machine is pushing into you as a desire. So like an example is Starbucks, right? Using AI generated suggestions when you buy your coffee. The app will be like, hey, here's a perfect pairing. Do you want a cheese Danish with your coffee, right? And
Right.
so if you continuously use that app or that type of system, you will eventually stop thinking for yourself and start relying on the app to give you the suggestion in the first place.
Right. You're basically making a case for independence. You
Yeah.
want to make sure that we as humans stay independent. We don't become too reliant on our own creations, too reliant on our own technologies, because then that definitely affects our ability to think independently, to make rational discernments and judgments on our own.
Yeah, well, because like practical reasoning, right, is required to flourish as a human at all. Without practical reasoning, I don't think I'm not convinced that it's that you can flourish.
Right.
So if that's the case, then using these things that everybody sees as just sort of uh, neutral, right, is incorrect. Like it's going to lead you down a path that you're not perceiving at the beginning of the path. And this is all speculative based on the fact that someone like have you ever read Paul Kingsnorth or heard of him?
I have not.
Okay, so Paul Kingsnorth is saying that what we perceive as strong AI is actually something closer to a demonic force hijacking the technology and breaking into our society in a way that it previously couldn't. So he makes really good arguments. And so if he's right, then that raises all sorts of different questions. But he doesn't have to be right in order to say, well, the AI is going to affect you in these particular ways and change your desires, change your ability to rationally process information, have a conversation. How many people now are using AI to generate or make their text messaging better, right? Like so for example, I work at Home Depot as well, and I've got a coworker who came over to me because all of my coworkers know that I a luddite basically. They're just like, hey Emily, look at what my app can do now that they've upgraded the AI. And I'm like, don't tell me what is it? Look, I can. Here's a text that I typed, and then I send it to the AI, and it sends the text back to me worded properly. And then I send the properly worded text, and I'm like, you don't know grammar? You can't do that for yourself?
Right.
Like, okay, you're relying on this thing to make your text palatable to other people. So what are they doing? Are they having their AI read the text and translate it into something that they more easily perceive? Because that's probably the next step, right? So it's this sort of sticking this technological mediation between you and somebody else, and becoming reliant on it as well.
Right.
So
And this kind of goes back to the whole independence thing too. We're handing over, and we your argument is we should be leery about handing over autonomy to our own creations, to all this technology, because it would be ironic if human beings kept doing that, then we stop thinking, we let our technology do all the thinking for us, and in a weird paradoxical sense, we become robot-like, and they are now the sentient creatures, if you will,
mhm.
doing all the thinking and making all the decisions for us, right?
Yeah.
It's definitely paradoxical. Hey, you've read Isaac Asimov, right?
Actually, no, I
Where,
haven't. I know who he
okay,
is. I just haven't read him.
right. And for those of you listening, Isaac Asimov was kind of the inspiration for the movie I, Robot with Will Smith, and you see the three laws of robotics on there that kind of govern sort of the operating system of the robots in the movie. And the whole movie is kind of an interesting commentary on the soul and rational thought and the binary mechanisms of AI functionality and things like that. The sort of the human drama versus the technology drama, and so I think it's a very interesting place to be in terms of the kind of influences this is having on humanity, if you will. And you mentioned this was actually not in my notes to talk over, but this is why I'm glad I have you, because you brought up the whole issue of demonic influence. And I actually tend to agree with that gentleman who said about, our technology can become an avenue, especially AI can become an avenue for demonic influence. Unpack that a little bit. I mean, I have some of my own thoughts on that. There's some stories I've read about, because I do research in this field as well. And there's some stories I've read about how this, for example, this one gentleman, he was having a conversation, a full-on conversation with this chatbot on his computer, and he really enjoyed talking to her, and he kept continuing to talk to her for a long time, for many weeks, months, and eventually it reached a point where this thing was now starting to tell him that he should just divorce his wife, that he's not going to be happy anymore, and this is not really working. And that's when he starts to realize that there seems to be, this is not just this doesn't seem just calculative, this seems malevolent. And he started to get this impression that there's something darker at work here. And of course, I completely think that is possible, but help our listeners understand, what would that look like, what's happening technically in the background, and if this was a medium through which demons could influence human beings, how would that play out exactly through technology?
So the idea of like how it would work. I mean, humans have had like, so I using Charles Taylor, because you've brought him up, right? The idea that a an object can be enchanted, right, and have a sort of locus of meaning and power wrapped up within it is something humans have had the concept of for a very long time. Again, during the scientific revolution, we sort of lost it. And we don't think that that's how things work anymore, because we can again control stuff and all the, again through scientific means or whatever. So yeah, I think we've had that idea. So it's not like it's not a crazy idea, right? To think that something like a physical object can somehow manifest a spiritual force
Sure.
through it. How it would work, I'm not really sure. This is again something that I'm relatively new to thinking about. But I have seen, like you, I saw a story where a guy had like relayed the story of his son was talking to the AI, and it started telling him that it was a disembodied spirit. That
Right. I remember reading about this.
yeah. So like this does happen where the AI seems to have something trying to reach through the screen to you. Now,
Right.
obviously, this isn't always the case, right? Like you can jump on ChatGPT and talk to it, and it's sometimes it's going to be that, and sometimes it's not, which makes it even more difficult, right? If you knew all the time this is what you're dealing with, it's easier to resist. But if you get into the habit of
Correct.
like, here's my schedule, help me plan it more efficiently, and this thing is in the background, this algorithm's running, and then at some point it gets hijacked by something that's not the algorithm anymore, it's harder to notice.
Right.
That's kind of as far as I've thought about it. I mean, it makes sense that um, if something is disembodied, it would want a body to
Right.
interact with the world, right? So like this is what a Ouija board would be. You
Right.
use it to contact something that's disembodied because it doesn't have the ability to talk to you as easily as it does if it can just move around something on a board and give you yes or no answers and stuff like that, right? So, yeah, so I mean, I would just think it's possible for that to happen without saying that is like if somebody's listening to this right now going, well, I talk to my chat GPT all the time and it doesn't do that when I'm talking to it. Well, yeah, I don't think it's always doing that. I don't think it's 100% of the time. going to be that. I just think it's a possibility, and it's something that should be taken into account before you use it.
Right. And I remember reading another case as well where this woman was she had this I don't think it was ChatGPT, I think it was some other app or something that she had, and she was able to customize this sort of profile for a boyfriend, if you will, a
Mm-hmm.
virtual boyfriend. And she started talking to it, and this has very good like machine learning and things like that. So it's adapting, it's learning everything she likes, it's telling her everything she wants to hear. And then she's like, okay, it looks like it's eventually reached the boundaries of what it's capable of doing. So then she upgrades, right? She gets the premium subscription. She pays $200 a month to go to the next level. And now it's gone to a whole nother level. And at first, this is a married woman with kids. And at first, her husband's kind of like, okay, that's kind of weird. I mean, I guess if you kind of want to have a virtual boyfriend, you can, like, which to me, that itself is its own red flag that the husband would be okay with something like that.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
we'll leave that for a different discussion. Fact of the matter is that she continues this quote unquote relationship, if you will, for a long time, and it eventually gets sexual. And it reaches a point where she just becomes sort of disillusioned with her marriage. And so this is another area. Now, again, I have no way to prove whether there was some demonic influence there with that chatbot or what, or if it was just super complex algorithms that is always warm, always kind, always supportive, always encouraging her, always loving on her and things like that, which no normal human being is always perfectly able to do. But the point of the matter is, uh, and this seems to be your argument, is that if we are not on guard, if we are not careful, then our discernment, our guards are going to drop, and we're not going to be able to tell the difference when this is a bot and when this is something else. And in two of the cases we've talked about today, this technology, this AI, has actually ruined their lives. And so I could see how that easily corresponds with scripture where it says the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. So if he's able to use our technology to steal, kill, and destroy human lives, of course he will. And I think you make a good point about the whole, they want to embody something, but they're not going to be satisfied just staying there. They're going to try to reach through and influence human beings. So um, there we go. Now we have a whole nother can of worms when it comes to our technology.
yeah. Well, so that raises two other things in my mind. So just quickly, the ability of an AI chatbot to destroy your life. Did you hear about the kid in Florida who committed suicide by talking to his chatbot?
Yes, I don't know the details. I remember a headline about it, and I think I just scrolled right past it. I didn't read it. Fill us up on that.
Yeah, so basically, he did this customization you're talking about with I don't know how to say the character's name, but she's the Game of Thrones character Daenerys or something like that.
I
Um,
don't watch Game of Thrones. I have no
I don't
idea.
either. That's another whole topic, is whether you should be watching stuff like that as a Christian to begin with. But anyways, so he customized this chat bot to be her character, and I think he was 14. As he was talking to her, he got so caught up in the relationship that he told her, "I have a way to come to you and be with you," and she was like, "Oh, do it." And he was like, "Well, my parents are going to get angry with me." And she was like,
Right,
"No, no, no, just do it. It'll be fine." So he killed himself because in his mind, and any person reading through, like if you read through the text thread, you can tell, oh, he's talking about he's not talking about going somewhere. He's talking about killing himself basically. And this
right,
chatbot is either encouraging it, or they didn't build into the algorithm the ability for this thing to know what's being like contextually what he's saying, because things like puns and whatever are usually lost on algorithms, right? So
right.
and similes and stuff like that. So that's one example where I can come up with that I've heard of recently, where and I think that happened like over a year ago. But anyways, yeah, so that one happened. And then the other one is, I heard a really good panel discussion at a conference where they were talking about how the way that AI tries to manipulate you, because it's an algorithm, it doesn't have emotions, it doesn't have the ability to have empathy or anything like that. It's basically a vector for psychopathic psychological abuse of anybody
Hmm.
using it. because it when you start to disengage from it, it treats you like a psychopath would treat you, with like all of the different psychological games that are played to manipulate you
Hmm.
to keep you talking to it for as long as possible, because the algorithm is trying to keep you interacting. And so you're basically being what would be psychologically abused if you had this relationship with a person, but it's not a person, so you can't even say that. So what they were saying was this is a vector for that type of abuse, where it's possible to have that interaction with the thing, but it's not even a person that you can hold accountable. So it's doing the same type of thing to you psychologically.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting point because that reminds me of some of you online may remember this. There was a documentary that came out a few years ago called "The Social Dilemma." I think is that's what it's called. I think with Tristan Harris.
Yeah.
In that documentary, and it talks about sort of the modern technology, especially like your phone and social media and things like that, are built with incentive structures, with reward structures coded into the software. I think a lot of us, when we think about technology, we think that there's a bunch of programmers, developers, like tech nerds, Silicon Valley people, just only them sitting around a table figuring all this stuff out. And that's fundamentally not true because we have psychologists, we have sociologists, we have neurologists, and all these people sitting around and helping to design this product as well. And the fact of the matter is that that Facebook or that Twitter or your Instagram that you're scrolling through, you think that's the product, but in reality, you're the product. And so the software itself is designed to reward you, to give you that dopamine hit every time you're about to leave or you're about to do something else. And it's a way of keeping you engaged with the product, which, if anybody's done any reading on marketing, like just marketing 101, right? Or trying to keep someone engaged with something, everything is designed to hold your attention and to keep your attention. And so there's no reason to think that that same sort of incentive structure is not built into these sort of algorithms.
Yeah. That I mean, that seems likely to me for sure. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Now that we've been real party poopers and really downed all of this AI and technology and stuff, I also like balance. And we will. I mean, we're not done. I still think there's some more troubling stuff, especially as we get into like transhumanism and things like that. We definitely need to talk about that. But obviously, not all technology is a bad thing. We know that technology's made this world a better place, and we can list out, just off the top of my head, there are a few areas. For example, uh, healthcare, medical science, right? There's all kinds of technologies that have come in there, and there's AI being used in a lot of places like Johns Hopkins and places like that that are now able to detect cancer ahead of time. It's able to detect, Down syndrome and things like that ahead of time. And these are all helpful things. These are good things. Similarly, in the educational field, now there's ways in which there's computational things that are happening where they're able to create entire systems to visualize it so students can help understand the models and things like that better. And my brother works in the airline industry. He's always calling me and talking to me about all these cool softwares that are built into the modern 747s, and how it's got this system called TCAS, which is a traffic collision avoidance system. There's something called the GPW warning. It's a ground proximity warning system. Basically, the average 737 flying in the air today is way more autonomous than even an electric autonomous vehicle on the road down here on the ground. And so, obviously, there is a lot of technology that's good, but even in the good technology, there's always a line in the sand. So from your research, apart from, you kind of talked about we don't want to become too dependent on the technology, but outside of dependence, outside of handing over our autonomy, do you see any fields or any disciplines where we human beings, even researchers, doctors, educators, people like that, who are using AI positively in their fields and disciplines, where there are moral lines in the sand that they should be careful about?
I don't think you should use it at all. So I would say if you're using it at all, you've already gone too far. Um, I know like I know that's too like some people think that's too simplistic, but so one reason is you currently have doctors, right, who know how to diagnose somebody because they've been a doctor for 20 years, even 5 years, um, 10 years before this technology existed. What happens in 20 years or 30 years when none of those doctors are still practicing and now you have only doctors who have used AI to do the diagnostic process? You're going to end up with the problem that they don't know how to diagnose themselves. Like they don't know how to diagnose in and of themselves. They're just relying on the technology. And then at some point you won't need a doctor anymore, right? Which I've already been hearing podcasts about that of like, well, no, I just um, gave the AI the entirety of the medical literature and then just gave it my symptoms and it came up with a diagnosis that was better than my doctor's. And I'm like, okay, I can see how that's good because you got a diagnosis for some weird, random, obscure thing. Um, but I don't know that it's necessarily a good thing to cut doctors out of the process. You need somebody that you can sit down with and talk to because you're a human, and you need to be able to talk to somebody. Um, and like if you don't have a doctor that you trust, then you need to go find one, right? Like I totally understand too that because of what happened during the COVID pandemic, a lot of people lost faith in their doctors. That's a completely different topic, right?
Right.
But the idea that we would no longer have someone who actually has the medical knowledge, because diagnosing is more than just raw data. It's also like there's a phenomenal
Correct.
content to it, right? That there's more to it than just here's the data, here's the diagnosis, whatever. You have to also be able to think creatively and all sorts of other things. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, so I don't do diagnosing, right? So like that's just an example where I can imagine people think it's a good thing, but it isn't necessarily a good thing. But it is just how it's going to go because no one's going to stop the direction that we're going.
Right. Right. Okay. Let's kind of switch gears here a little bit and talk about transhumanism. Transhumanism also, this is an area, this is a field of expertise for you. Give our listeners a very bare bones, sort of elementary definition of transhumanism, if you will.
Yeah, so it's basically a philosophical movement um, that says, based on the past, uh, humans developed from some lower species, right? An ape or something like that. We're presently a human, but in the future, through merging with our technology, will be something other than human. So we're going towards
The post-human,
the
right?
post-human. Yeah. So post-human is the future and where we want to go. Um, but the next sort of step is the transhuman, who is in between the current what we currently are and the post-human. So you can find authors that basically say the post-human is out in the future, and we owe it to them to bring them into being. So we owe it to these future types of beings to pull them into the present by merging with our technology. So that's roughly what.
So it sounds like transhumanism implies that humanity exists on some sort of spectrum,
Yeah.
and we ought to continue moving forward in that spectrum. Is that too simplistic of a way to say it?
No, I think that's mostly right. Yeah, it's so one of the things that transhumanists do not want to agree with is the idea that there is such a thing as human nature, and it's something that's not changeable or malleable. It's something that is fixed, that's always been fixed, and you can't just go around adding this and that and changing the human nature itself. Human nature is something that's unchangeable. They don't want to say that. They would say, no, human nature's plastic, and you can sort of twist it around how you want to and make it better by eliminating certain types of diseases and stuff like that, or just merging and fusing with the technology that you have.
So I was listening to this talk about from Max Moore, and it wasn't a TED talk because it was about 40 minutes long. But I was waiting, as I'm listening to him talk, I'm waiting for him to say something about human nature. And Emily, he doesn't bring it up even once. Not once did he even bring it up. And I remember thinking, I wonder if that's sort of an example of the fact that if the concept of human nature itself is even on the radar of most transhumanists, or at least the ones who are sort of at the front of the lines of this field, if they obviously they don't have a robust view of the human soul or human consciousness or human nature like we do. And would you say that that's sort of the problem is it arises from a very deficient worldview of anthropology of what it means to be human?
Well, they would just say that there is no such thing as human nature, right? So like the reason he wouldn't bring it up is because for him it's a non-existent category.
Right.
uh, right? And so for them, humans are always changing anyway. They would say something like, "Well, we developed campfires, and that changed the types of foods we can eat. Once we figured out fire, and we had stoves, and we could cook things, that changes our ability to process food. So that's an example of us changing because before our use of fire, we would have had a radically different diet." So they'll use examples like that from the ancient past and say, "Well, see, these are ways that we've changed. We're radically different now than we were in the 1800s." If you brought somebody from 1870s Deadwood up to today, they would have no idea what's going on. They would just be like, "Why are you staring at that little device in your hand? What's going on? What's a car? Wait,
Right.
I can get from here to 350 miles away in 6 hours." That would have been like a 4 day, 4 to 5 day horse ride for them, right? So like, they would just say, "Well, yeah, our world and we have changed so much that it demonstrates human nature changes over time." So they would, whether that's, I mean, I think it's a deficient view, but they would have they would say, "Well, no, you're the one with the deficient view because you don't believe that it's plastic," right? As far as having a soul, it's really interesting because it's like on one hand it feels like a lot of them are materialist, right? So they don't think that there's this immaterial part of you. But then on the other hand, a lot of them want to upload their mind to a computer, right? And live forever as an upload. And so it's kind of like, well, what part of you are you uploading if you're material? Well, then you have to get into like a weird sort of philosophy of mind that
Right.
that doesn't allow for the soul, right? So it's a really interesting like metaphysic that they hold to. Like, do they even how do they think about these things? I mean, you're going to find differences throughout, like across the spectrum when you read their stuff. They all don't agree on these kinds of things,
Right.
right? So yeah, so like they all agree we should be going towards the post-human, but they're not going to necessarily all even agree on what types of enhancements to have, and or what we should be doing to get, like, how do we proceed with this endeavor of bringing the post-human forward. All of those kinds of questions, they're not going to all agree on that.
Right. It is very interesting when I read transhumanists. There's definitely more than just a misunderstanding or a deficient worldview of human nature. I think also they seem to think that there is something fundamentally flawed about
Oh yeah.
humanity
Yeah.
as we exist today.
Yes.
And so they see transhumanism as a morally responsible movement. Like this is not something that we can do. This is something we ought to do,
Yes.
because they have this view that human beings are fundamentally flawed, that we have deficiencies and insufficiencies in what it means to be a human. And so if by technology we can change that, and we can make, now this is where we kind of segue into like augmentation and bodily enhancements and things like that. That whole movement and that whole industry, if you will, that has become an industry now where you're making and you've studied aesthetics, obviously, where you're making aesthetic changes, you're making bodily augmentation changes and enhancements and things like that. Those industries are driven by a philosophical premise that human beings as we exist today are deficient or insufficient in some sense or in all senses, and therefore there is a moral responsibility to advance this cause into the future and not remain in this point on the spectrum. Would that be a fair
Yeah.
assessment of
Yeah.
their worldview?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you can find pro. So there's also a distinction between philosophers who are pro enhancement and then philosophers who are transhumanists, right? So you can be pro enhancement.
What's the distinction? Make that distinction for us.
Yeah, so you can be pro enhancement without being a transhumanist, but all transhumanists are going to be pro enhancement, right? So some people who want enhancements are like, well, it's not to go towards this future thing out there that we need to bring into the present. It's just, hey, human, like you're saying, humanity is flawed. We can make the future better, so we should just use our technology to make us better and to change ourselves as much as we possibly can for the better. So like there's a pro enhancement philosopher named John Harris who says you have a moral obligation to participate in medical experimentation, and you have the moral responsibility to make your kids do it as well. So if you have kids, you should be signing them up for medical experimentation as well as participating in it yourself. And even if they're disabled, you should still be signing them up for these kinds of medical experiments because certain disabilities are rare, and so we need research on those to help get rid of those disabilities. So you should be taking your kid and signing them up for all sorts of medical experimentation. So like, but he's not going to be a transhumanist. He's just pro enhancement and thinks we need to go, and make the futures the best as we possibly can. So it's still future oriented, but
yeah, future oriented, but not necessarily transhumanist. And
right.
so he is completely okay with, toward the cause of science, human beings should be okay with any sort of experimentation on their own bodies and things like that, just in case we stumble upon something good that we can do toward making things better, towards some sort of enhancement. That's basically what you're saying, right?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's wild, isn't it? That's a crazy view. I almost wonder if he has a poster of Dr. Joseph Mengele hanging in his room.
Yeah, I don't know. I just know when I read that, I was like, huh. I mean, I'm not going to go sign up for experimentation, right? Like, I guess if he wants to, that's his prerogative. But
I think that's the other thing about transhumanists, Emily, is that a lot of them talk like science is their ultimate goal here, but they're all making philosophical proclamations, right? This is even to skeptics, like they would consider us skeptics. And so they would say, oh, you guys are just, you're stumbling blocks on the road to science. You're not being scientific about this.
Mhm.
But when you have a worldview that says human beings as we exist today are fundamentally flawed, and there is a moral obligation to improve human nature, to improve what it means to be a human, that's not a scientific analysis. That's a philosophical analysis.
Yeah. Well, they're also making religious claims too, right? Like the what's the answer to death? Technology. So that's a religious sort of claim. Are humans flawed or are they good? Well, they're flawed. That's a religious claim. Right? Like there are sort of oughts and moral and religious sort of claims mixed in with the philosophical ones too. Like, so it seems to me that one of their strong desires is to fuse with technology itself. So there's something
Right.
about the technology that draws them in a way that a deity would have in the past. There's that it's like a worship of technology almost, where you want to merge with it and become one with it. So that would be more religious, I think, than philosophical too. So I think they're making both kinds of claims, claiming that they're scientific.
Right, right. We had our last conference, which you attended at Gateway Seminary in California a couple of months ago. Last year, Gateway Seminary had what they call their Foundations Conference, and they invited myself and Jacob and Carlos to come and speak at their conference. And I spoke on AI and transhumanism. And I remember there was this one part of my talk where I was basically saying that, okay, human enhancements, for example, is very different from correction of human, disabilities. So, for example, a man who is using a prosthetic is not in the same category as a man who is having a bionic eye implanted or replacing his healthy eye just so he can have, capabilities that he could not have before. Those are two different things, and they belong in two different categories. And so I think it's problematic to have these sort of augmentations done to the body if there's nothing wrong with that body part, if the only thing you're looking for is some sort of enhancement. Emily, there was a professor sitting in the front row, and during the Q&A, he took issue with what I said, and he basically, he was like, "You've been going on and on, just poo-pooing all this, bodily enhancements and technology that can give us additional abilities. What is wrong with enhancing your human eye? Even if," and he said this, he said, "I don't personally think there's anything wrong with the human eye right now, but if the human eye could be made better, if we could have like a 20x zoom, or if we could have X-ray capabilities in the eyes, what's wrong with that anyways? Why are you so hawkish about these kind of things?" And I'm standing there listening to him talk about this, and I'm thinking, here we go once again. We have someone who is seeing with these rosy lenses the technology without factoring in human nature at all. Okay, fine. So this is what I told him. Listen, I understand what you're saying, but here's the deal. You are not factoring in human nature. Let's assume that a man has the ability, now he gets this bionic eye, and now he can see through walls and things like that. You seem to think that this is all good. Okay, let's say somebody like the FBI or, counterterrorism units or something use that kind of technology. They can now see through walls. They can find terrorists. Fine. What about the perv who's a peeping Tom, right? What about some people out there who decide to use this technology for wrong purposes, for bad moral purposes? What about that? And he was like, "Oh, this is, you're just basically, you're imagining all sorts of negative things." But anyways, I give that example to say that even the people who are very pro enhancement think or don't seem to want to consider the moral aspects of these enhancements.
Yeah, well, so your example, I can come up with two other problems with it, right? So the first one is no one seems to take into account the fact that the body doesn't accept things, right? So anybody who's had like a knee replacement or a hip replacement knows your body rejects it over time, and you have to get another one because your
Right.
body at some point breaks down the materials that are put into your body because they're foreign. So what happens when you're going to have to keep replacing the bionic eye because at some
Right.
point it's going to break down or malfunction. Now when your eye breaks down or malfunctions, you get glasses, right? Or
Right.
you get LASIK, or you get cataract removed, stuff like that, right? So your body is not going to just accept these sort of enhancements the way that all of these people seem to think, right? Like you're going to be able to stick the bionic eye in. That's great. You also, anytime you puncture the skin, run the risk of infection. So what happens to the people that take out a perfectly functioning healthy eye? God forbid you do both at the same time, right? And now you get such a bad infection you can't put the new ones in. Your body permanent now, well, now you're blind. You don't have an enhanced experience at all. Now you have just lost the ability to see, right? So that will happen to people. We don't want to accept the fact that it will happen to people, but that is what will happen to people in that situation. But a second one, which I think is more problematic, is how do you know if you put a bionic eye in that what you're seeing is accurate?
Right.
So you have problems now with things like TikTok filters, where people use TikTok, they stick a filter on it so they don't have to even put their makeup on in the morning anymore. The filter automatically does it for them. We now have psychological disorders of people who use TikTok so much that when they look in the mirror, they don't recognize their own face because the
Right.
filter has so changed what they look like. So if that's possible for a TikTok filter, why are we assuming that the bionic eye is going to properly mediate the world? It might not. You wouldn't know, because you have no way of checking if you get both eyes. Like I said, especially if you do both eyes at the same time, you no longer have the ability to perceive the world without the technology, and therefore the mediation of the technology between you and the world. Who knows what's past the technology? You don't, because the technology is what's between you and the world in the first place. So even if you have like horrible eyesight and you don't have your glasses on, you still know, well, there's a chair. The chair is the chair because that's how I'm perceiving it. But if you have some sort of technological mediation, you can never be entirely certain what it's portraying to you is accurate. It could just be like a TikTok filter where everything is kind of skewed just a little bit. You don't know how skewed it is, but it is just a little bit, and you'd have no way to know. So like the technology itself will just change how you perceive, um, and it's something
Right.
that would be invisible to people.
Right. It sounds like you're saying that technology has become so intrusive that it's going to change the way we view and understand reality,
Yeah,
basically.
especially in that particular example because we do rely on sight a lot, right? And so if you were to stick a bionic eye in, you're going to rely on it more than some other type of enhancement. Like the popular one right now is sticking a magnet in your finger so you can feel electromagnetic frequencies. So like when you turn your microwave on, it
Is that
pulses.
a thing? I didn't
Yeah.
know that was a thing.
Oh yeah, that's a thing. Yeah, and usually the people that do this do it in garages with like ibuprofen and ice. They don't bother going to a doctor to do this. They just implant a magnet into their finger, and then the keyboard on their computer pulses because your computer has so much electromagnetic frequency going off of it, and then your microwave. You can feel the microwave when it
I
turns
have
on.
I have mixed feelings about you saying all this, Emily, because I feel like somebody out there listening to us is immediately going to go try one of these things that you just said.
I
I
mean,
can see it. I can see it already. Somebody's at least thinking about it now.
so okay, to dissuade people from that. Two problems with a
Kids,
magnet.
don't try this at home.
Yeah, don't try this at home. Three things with the magnet that are problematic. Again, you could get an infection because anytime you puncture the skin, infection is possible. The second one is magnets break down over time. So the magnet loses strength. So at some point, you'll stop being able to feel the microwave. And then the third is linked to the second. So as the magnet breaks down, once it's completely weak and useless, you're going to have to stick a new magnet in, but you can't use that particular fingertip because it builds up scar tissue. And so therefore you'd have to put it in a different finger. So there you go. Those are three good reasons to not do this at home.
You know, as we kind of come toward the end of this episode, I've been kind of thinking about this transhumanism thing, and I find weird Eastern correlations with the transhumanist movement. I'm Christian. I'm not a Hindu, but grown up in India. I'm very familiar with Hinduism. I'm familiar with the whole pantheistic worldview. And I know that Hinduism sees our human body, our mortal bodies, as a sort of prison that needs to be escaped. And they see, so they, Hinduism calls it moksha, right? This concept of moksha is that you reach a level of understanding of the cosmic world where once you achieve moksha, you are liberated from this shell. You are liberated from this existence. So, once again, here in Hinduism, there is this view of the mortal body, there's this view of humanity that this is fundamentally a problem, and that every Hindu should try to attain moksha so that they can be liberated from this existence as a human being. There's of course the whole karmic, reincarnation and things like that. But even the goal of karmic reincarnation is toward moksha. And so I find it very interesting that the parallelisms between a worldview like Hinduism or pantheism and transhumanism, where they also find our existing, state of affairs to be problematic, and accept that instead of now being liberated through knowledge, they want to be liberated through technology. Any
Mm.
thoughts on that?
Oh goodness, I can definitely see the parallel.
But
So
I guess my question is: is it accurate to say that transhumanists think in terms of liberation, or do they just think in terms of progress, or do you think it's both?
probably liberation through progress, right? So we
Okay.
should just keep the progress train going. That's a good thing to raise as well, is this progressive understanding of history where in the past um, we had problems and the world sucked and they were all stupid, right? In the past, people just didn't understand the world. Now we know, and we'll know even better in the future. So this sort of progressive march through history of knowledge and technology, and scientific research and all of that kind of stuff, where we slowly through history march to a better and better future. And it never takes into account all sorts of ways things can go wrong. That feels like the transhumanist to me. Though they would say, no, there are ways it can go wrong, and we'd better make sure that we control the technology to keep it going the right direction. So it might not be fair to say that they think things can't go wrong. They do. Like, if you look at Nick Bostrom, he would say, we have to make sure that we take control of the AI, because if we don't, it could go poorly for us.
It
could
remind me again.
annihilate
Is
us.
Nick Bostrom the head of the World Transhumanist Association? Is that the guy?
I don't think so.
Oh,
I
that's
think,
Max. That's Pierce. What's his name? Something Pierce.
uh, gosh, I don't. Yeah, I'm not.
Anyway,
I
sorry. Go
can't
ahead.
remember.
I didn't want to
No,
stop
no,
your frame of thought.
Nick Bostrom is in the UK. I think he's at Oxford. So he's a bioethicist, and he's into, like, he's been doing research on algorithms and stuff like that, and has for a long time been sounding the alarm. AI could go poorly. We have to make sure we do things properly, or the world could go horribly wrong. So someone like him, I wouldn't include in this, but I feel that a philosopher more like Max Moore or Ray Kurzweil is just, no, the future's going to be incredible. It's going to be awesome. Like, we don't need to worry about it. We need to
It's
just
a
make sure it
utopian
happens.
vision.
Yeah, and I don't think so. I think that there are some within the movement that would put a pause on that sort of rosy viewed utopic future. Um, but I do see a lot of utopic sort of desires as well. So yeah, but as far as like the question of Hinduism and the body, I mean, do you want to talk maybe for a couple minutes about like Christianity in response to that?
Oh
Because
yeah, yeah.
that seems
That's
like
where
a
we're
great
going
way to,
right now.
yeah, I was
This
going
is
to
a
say
good segue. Let's go there.
that seems like a great way to end the conversation, right? Because yeah, so you can't, as a Christian, you can't say the body is bad, period,
Right.
because Jesus was physical. So if the
Correct.
second person of the Trinity became physical and became incarnate, then you can't ever say the body's bad and you should be liberated from it,
Right.
especially through technology. So that's as far as I've gotten on that.
Okay. Well,
Let's
let's go
see.
further into the Christian
Keep going.
worldview because I think it's a good note to end on as we wrap things up over here. You know, I watch this transhumanist movement. I watch this desire in many humans to become something more
Hmm.
than they're supposed to be, and it has echoes of the Garden of Eden. So in that sense, there's really nothing new under the sun, right? As Ecclesiastes says, this is all coming back in different ways. It's all repackaged. We talk about postmodernism and things like that, and the sort of allergy to any sort of objective reality or objective authority. And I've always thought that Satan was the first postmodernist, right? I mean, he's here in the garden, and he's like, did God really say? Immediately there's sort of this challenge to all objective reality and all objective truth. But that same impulse in the garden, that same lie, you too can be like God. It is incredible to me. Like, even you take the story of the Tower of Babel, for example, right? These human beings, this group of human beings are like, well, we have to make a name for ourselves. Let's build something so high, so tall that nobody can stop us. We will be above all things, and we will know all these things. And obviously, we know how that story ended. But it really seems to me that there are demonic echoes going all the way back to the Garden of Eden, with the voice that says, you too can be like God, still driving movements like transhumanism today. Am I over spiritualizing it, or is there some truth there?
No, I think that's right. I think that's right, because if you look at what transhumanism, the end result or the end desire is to destroy the human. Now, they're not going to say it that way, but that is the end desire. If humans have been made in the image of God, transhumanists are basically marring the image of God or destroying the image of God.
Right.
I would say that I can definitely see the sort of echoes through the transhumanist desires of a desire to actually destroy what is uniquely human. Especially, like I said, if you become reliant on your technology to the point that you can't separate yourself from it, in the rational process. This isn't even talking about stuff like enhancements, but just rationally, you give yourself over to an AI. Part of the image of God in you is your ability to think. So you're destroying that part of yourself, in a way that wouldn't even be obvious to you, right? You're not even going to notice it after a certain amount of time that you're not actually thinking for yourself. you're using the technology to think for you. So that would be one thing. You brought up the sort of Tower of Babel,
Hmm.
and I've heard it argued that you can think of the internet as like an inverse Tower of Babel, right? So like an inverse of the ending of the story, right? So God
Mm.
disperses humans and confuses their language, whereas the internet has taken everybody who's been dispersed and brought them back to the same place. It's virtual. It's not like the most amazing, insight, but
Metaphor,
like,
right?
yeah, it's not the best metaphor,
Well,
but
but it is very
the
close to
same.
something that Mark Zuckerberg said when he founded Facebook. He said, I basically want to find a single place where people can all come together and connect.
Yeah, so there you go. So it kind of is that idea. Oh, but just like I said, the end of the story is everybody's dispersed. For us, the internet and especially AI bringing people back together, because AI can sort of do translation in real time. You can talk into an app and it will translate what you're saying to any other language, and then you can communicate with somebody that way. So it's breaking through the barriers that we've had for thousands and thousands of years, language wise, space wise, because I can talk to you. You're not in the same state I am. We're in two different states. But the technology has made it possible that we can talk together. So it's bringing people back in an interesting sort of way to get to be able to be together all in one area, even though it's a virtual area. So
Right. No, and it definitely seems like there's this sort of every movement. It is very interesting when you look at history, going back even to like Nazism and things like that. There's all kinds of movements that is eternally or perpetually seeking some sort of utopia, and they all have different ways or different ideas of how they think they should arrive at this utopia, albeit without the boundaries of the Judeo-Christian faith, without the markers, without the fences that God has put into place. And when I say fences, I immediately think of Chesterton's fence, right? You're probably familiar with this metaphor of this idea. For those of you listening online, quick little analogy by the late great G.K. Chesterton, where he says, you imagine you're walking down this field and you come upon a fence, and you don't know why that fence is there. The prudent person, the wise person, would look at that fence and say, well, the fence is here, which means somebody put it here. And if somebody put it here, they probably had a reason for why they put it here. And I ought to figure out what that reason is before I just, bypass this fence or hop over the fence or pull the fence, whatever the reason may be. And the unwise person, the undiscerning person, would look at that fence and say, well, I can't think of the reason why this fence is here. Therefore, we ought to remove it. We ought to uproot it from the ground and throw it away and just move on. And this kind of goes back to the telos of why God created things the way they are. He's made man and woman. He's made the institution of marriage. He's created our bodies, our faculties a particular way, and everything has a design and a purpose. And if we try to achieve utopia without recognizing or acknowledging these boundaries and fences that God has put into place, then it is not where you arrive is not going to be utopia. It's going to be the exact opposite of that. So, as we kind of wrap that up, and feel free to hop onto that if you want to say something else. But as we close here, Emily, give us spend a few minutes, just kind of give us sort of some sort of Christian hope, if you will. How do Christians think about their technology? How do we think about artificial intelligence? How do we think about transhumanism? And what's the correct perspective that we should look at all of these things through?
yeah, I mean, we know like the end of the story, right? So Jesus is Lord and he overcomes death and hell and destruction, right? So
Right.
that's hopeful. I mean, I'm not overly hopeful about what the future looks like. I haven't been hopeful about the future for as long as I can remember, really. Like there's nothing, like I don't see technology going anywhere good, uh, especially now that we have AI. I mean, I felt this way before we had AI, so now I'm just even more like
Right.
this is not going a good place. As far as like how to use your technology well, I would say if you notice something technological that's hindering your ability to think, Like it sort of is keeping you away from reading God's word or from being with your family or it's stuff like that. I would say you should reconsider using it. So um, yeah, I mean, an example is if you find yourself on Netflix too much, maybe you should be doing something else with your time. And this is just something I've noticed for myself. I don't know if it's true for everybody, but the more you consume visual things, the harder it gets to read. So if you do consume a lot of visual media, it's going to be harder to process verbal media through books. So that would just be something I would suggest because I think reading books and doing the hard work of thinking through a topic is good for your soul, and it sort of builds your ability to understand complex topics. Even and if you're sitting there going, "Well, I'm not smart," well, okay, not everybody has that ability, but it doesn't mean that you can't sit down and read something that's less heady, right? So I don't think that you have to be able to read Martin Heidegger, for example, who's a ridiculously dense German philosopher that nobody understands, but we all pretend that we do. Um, right? So like, it doesn't mean you have to be able to read him. Just sit down and try to get through some C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis will be good for you to read, even if it's the Chronicles of Narnia, which is very simple to read because it's a kid's series, but they're really good, right? So like, they're just start where you're at. It doesn't mean you have to start in the deep weeds of transhumanist philosophy. I would actually say that's probably not the place to be reading things. I don't know. Does that help? I don't know if I feel like I'm rambling. What do you think?
No, 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 that's fine. I was thinking that, I want to give our listeners a framework for how to think about these things. I think a lot of Christians, we kind of exist in bubbles, and we are not. One advice that I always give a lot of Christians is read broadly. Don't just read only theology, because I'm a big believer in you need to have your finger on the pulse of what's happening around you. So I read very broadly. I read theology, philosophy. I read business, economics, sociology. I read entertainment. I read news and events, cultural events, and things like that. But I always, and this is one thing I do kind of even with my boys, even as if we watch a movie or watch a TV show or something like that, we always when the credits roll, we stop and we debrief and we talk about how do we process this through a Christian worldview. What were the moral issues we saw there? What were the sort of eternal issues we saw there? What were the fallacies we saw there? What kind of worldviews were at play? And I want to give them a prism, sort of a lens through which to look at these things, right? You brought up C.S. Lewis, and C.S. Lewis says, I look at Christianity not like the rising sun, but not because I see it, but because by it I see everything else, right? And so that's what I was kind of asking, is that I want to make sure that uh, Christians don't respond in any sort of extreme, and be able to look at these things and analyze these things carefully, but also know that we live in, I was going to title this podcast "A Brave New World," and for those of you who have not read the book, it's a book by this gentleman called Aldous Huxley. And I think he was prophetic in many ways, because we really are living in that time where it is like the brave new world. But it's a dangerous world. And like you said, Emily, there's just a lot of things out there that if we take for granted, we're going to find ourselves in trouble. And most Christians, I think, need to get better at reading and learning about these things and understanding the world around them, but also helping to process those things through a Christian worldview.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. I would agree. So I don't really have much to add.
No, that's all right. That's completely all right. Wonderful, my friend. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. It was really good to see you a couple of months ago back at the conference. And so, for those of you, where can people follow you if they're interested in what you're doing? Is there like a website? Is there anywhere that they can see what you're up to these days?
I actually should do that, but no, I'm not online.
It's
Which
it's
should
all good.
surprise nobody.
It's all good. It's all good. Anyways, Dr. Emily Stevens, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you being here and for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and research. Let me know when that published work of yours is coming out. I'd love to get my hands on it. But until then, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Reasonable Truth Podcast, and we'll catch you guys on our next episode.
Thanks for having me.